It was early morning, just before sunrise, and the city was still half asleep. Inside the tall glass building of a large company downtown, one man was already at work. His name was Daniel. He wore a simple uniform, pushed a mop bucket from floor to floor, and quietly cleaned the hallways before everyone else arrived. For most people, Daniel was just the janitor, the man who made sure the floors shined and the trash bins were never full. But to those who took the time to notice, he was much more than that. He had a calm presence about him, the kind that made people feel at ease. He greeted everyone with a polite nod or a soft, "Good morning," no matter who they were. He worked carefully, making sure every desk, window, and hallway looked spotless before the day began. Even though his job was simple, he treated it with respect. That morning, Daniel was cleaning near the executive floor, the area most employees avoided unless they had a meeting. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors and the air smelled faintly of fresh polish. He had just finished mopping near the elevator when he heard sharp footsteps echoing down the hall. It was Mr. Roberts, the CEO of the company. He was a tall man in a sharp suit, known for his strict rules and cold personality. He walked fast, always looking annoyed about something. Everyone in the building feared him. People said he didn't like being questioned, and he expected perfection from everyone. Daniel moved aside as Roberts approached, quietly pushing his mop out of the way. But before he could say anything, Roberts stopped abruptly and frowned. "What is this?" he said, pointing at the wet floor. "Are you out of your mind mopping right now? Do you expect me to walk on this mess?" Daniel opened his mouth to explain that he had just finished and was about to put up a wet floor sign, but Roberts didn't give him the chance. His voice grew louder, echoing down the hall. "Unbelievable. This is why we have issues around here. People like you don't think ahead. You just make things harder for the rest of us." The few employees nearby froze. They looked away, pretending to check their phones or walk faster. Nobody wanted to be involved. Daniel stood quietly, his hands gripping the mop handle. He wasn't angry and just deeply hurt. He had worked in that building for 3 years and never once caused trouble. "I'm sorry, sir," he said softly. "I was almost done here." Roberts gave a small, sarcastic laugh. "Sorry doesn't fix stupidity," he muttered, shaking his head. Then, under his breath, but loud enough for others to hear, he added something cruel and degrading about Daniel's background. It wasn't just an insult. It carried a sting, one that went far beyond the workplace. The words hung heavy in the air. One of the interns standing by the reception desk looked up, her eyes wide. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard. She quietly slipped her phone out and hit the record button without anyone noticing. Daniel stood still, his eyes fixed on the floor. The mop handle trembled slightly in his hands. He didn't say anything back. He just nodded, swallowed hard, and moved to the corner of the hallway, letting the CEO pass. Roberts didn't even look back. He stormed into the elevator, still muttering to himself about incompetence. When the elevator doors closed, the hall fell silent again. The employees who had been nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks but said nothing. One of them walked over and whispered, "Hey, don't take it personally." "He's like that with everyone." Daniel forced a small smile. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I've been through worse." He picked up his bucket and continued his work, moving slowly from one corner to another. But his mind wasn't focused anymore. The words he heard replayed in his head again and again. He tried to brush them off, but they stuck like glue. All day long, people avoided talking about what had happened. The intern who recorded the video sat at her desk, staring at her phone, unsure what to do. She felt a knot in her stomach. What she had witnessed didn't feel right. She wanted to say something, but she was just an intern. If she spoke up, she might lose her job. Meanwhile, Daniel finished his shift in silence. As he packed up his things in the janitor's room, he thought about how life had brought him here. Years ago, he had dreams of running his own business, and for a while he did. He had a small cleaning company with a few workers from his neighborhood. They worked hard, treated clients well, and built a good reputation. But one day, a major contract was suddenly canceled without warning. It broke his business completely. He lost everything, his savings, his company, and his home. He never told anyone that the contract had been with this very same company. The same building where he now worked as a janitor. When he first got hired here, it was out of desperation. He needed the money, and he told himself that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. Still, sometimes at night when the building was empty, he'd walk past the executive offices and wonder what life would have been like if things hadn't gone wrong. That day, as he left the building, the sky had turned gray. The city lights reflected off the puddles on the sidewalk. Daniel walked to the bus stop, clutching his small lunch bag. The rain began to fall, but he didn't bother opening his umbrella. He just let the drops hit his face, washing away the sting of the morning. Back in the office, the intern, still shaken by what she'd recorded, replayed the video quietly in her headphones. The sound of the CEO's voice made her skin crawl. She knew people needed to see it, not out of revenge, but because it wasn't right to treat anyone like that. She decided to send it anonymously to a coworker she trusted, asking what she should do. The next morning, Daniel came in as usual, early and quiet. The night's rain had left streaks on the building's windows, and the lobby smelled of wet concrete. He put on his gloves, filled his bucket, and began his rounds. For him, it was just another day. He didn't expect that anything had changed, but throughout the morning, people seemed to glance at him differently. Some offered polite smiles. Others seemed nervous. Daniel noticed it but didn't think much of it. By noon, something strange was happening. A few employees were whispering near the coffee station, phones in their hands. Someone looked at him, then quickly looked away. Daniel was confused until one of the security guards walked over and said quietly, "Hey, you might want to check your phone. Something's going on." Daniel didn't own a fancy phone and he didn't have social media accounts, but when he finally opened his messages, he saw several unread texts from coworkers. They all said the same thing. "Did you see the video?" He had no idea what they were talking about. He shrugged it off and kept working, thinking it was probably some office drama. But deep down, he could sense that the morning's peace wasn't going to last. Later that afternoon, Roberts walked into the building again, looking furious. He stormed past the front desk, shouting for his assistant. His face was red, his voice loud. Daniel caught only fragments. Something about a leaked video and who dared to do this. Daniel's heart skipped. He didn't want to believe it, but he already knew what video it must have been. Someone had recorded what happened. He felt panic rise inside him, not for himself, but for whoever shared it. He didn't want anyone to get in trouble because of him. As Roberts disappeared into his office, Daniel quietly went back to work. He mopped in silence, his thoughts spinning. The humiliation from yesterday was still fresh, but now it was mixed with fear. He didn't like attention, and he certainly didn't want to be in the middle of a scandal. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Daniel walked through the empty halls again. The building was quiet except for the faint hum of lights. He looked around, the same polished floors, the same glass walls, the same offices. But something inside him felt different. Maybe it was because the truth had a way of coming out. No matter how hard people tried to bury it. He sighed softly and whispered to himself, "Maybe this time things will be different." Outside, the city lights glowed against the dark sky. Somewhere far away, a video was spreading faster than anyone could imagine. A simple clip that showed one man's cruelty and another's quiet strength. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, that one moment in the hallway was about to change his life forever. The next morning started quietly. The office building looked the same as always, but there was something different in the air. People were whispering in the hallways, glancing at their phones and exchanging uneasy looks. It wasn't the usual office gossip. It was something bigger. Daniel didn't know yet how fast things had changed overnight. The video of the CEO's outburst had spread across social media like wildfire. It was short, less than a minute long, but powerful enough to make thousands of people stop scrolling. The clip showed everything, the harsh tone, the insult, and Daniel's silent, calm reaction. Comments poured in from strangers who had never met him. Some were shocked, others furious. People called it another example of arrogance and inequality in the workplace. Within hours, the clip had been shared by news pages, bloggers, and influencers. The company's logo was visible in the background, and that made the situation even worse for them. But while the online world was buzzing, Daniel still had no idea. He was sweeping the parking lot, humming softly to himself. He liked mornings before the crowd arrived. They gave him a sense of peace before the day's rush began. When he entered the building, the security guard nodded at him differently than usual, almost respectfully. "Morning, Daniel," he said. "Morning," Daniel replied, a bit surprised by the tone. He noticed more people greeting him than usual, but he didn't think much of it. He thought maybe people were just in a good mood. Around mid-morning, one of the receptionists called him over. "Hey, Daniel," she said carefully. "You might want to take a look at this." She turned her phone screen toward him. Daniel frowned. "What's that?" "It's you," she said. He leaned closer, confused, then froze. On the screen, he saw himself standing in the hallway, mop in hand, while the CEO's angry voice filled the air. He heard every word again, this time from an outside perspective. It felt strange seeing it like that, like watching a painful memory he didn't want to relive. His first thought wasn't pride or revenge. It was worry. "Who recorded this?" he asked softly. "I don't know," the receptionist said. "Someone must have posted it last night. It's everywhere now." Daniel took a slow breath and handed the phone back. "Thank you," he said, then walked away quietly. He didn't know what to feel. Part of him wanted to disappear, to pretend none of it had happened. He didn't like being the center of attention. But deep down, another part of him felt something different, a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because the moment had hurt him deeply, and relief because maybe, finally, people could see what he and others like him went through every day without saying a word. By noon, reporters were calling the company. The HR department sent out an email asking employees not to speak to the media. The CEO's office door stayed closed all morning. Some people said he was furious. Others said the board was already having meetings about the situation. Daniel stayed out of it. He just kept doing his work. When someone approached him to ask how he felt, he smiled politely and said, "I'm fine. I just want to finish my shift." But when he got home that evening, the quiet of his small apartment felt heavier than usual. He sat on the edge of his couch and stared at his phone. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years were popping up, some from old coworkers, others from neighbors. They all said the same thing. "We saw what happened. We're proud of you." He didn't know how to reply. He wasn't looking for praise. He just wanted to live with dignity, do his job, and go home at peace. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window thinking about his life. His small apartment wasn't much, just a couch, a table, and a few photos on the wall. In one of the photos, he was standing outside a van with his old company's name on it. His employees were smiling beside him, holding cleaning equipment. That was before everything fell apart. He remembered how proud he'd been when he started that company. It had taken years of saving and planning. He had started with one small client, a bakery, and slowly built his way up. He treated his workers like family, paying them fairly and never letting anyone talk down to them. He believed that hard work and respect could take a person anywhere. But then came the big contract with the large corporation. It was supposed to change everything. The deal was huge, enough to expand his business and hire more people. He had worked night and day to meet their standards, always delivering on time. But then, one morning, without warning, they canceled the contract. No explanation, no chance to fix anything. Just a short letter saying the company had decided to go in a different direction. It broke him. His business couldn't survive the loss. He had to sell the van, let go of his workers, and eventually he lost his home too. That same company later hired him as a janitor through an agency. At first he thought about refusing, but he needed the job. He told himself it didn't matter. Work was work. Pride had no place when you had bills to pay. Now, years later, fate had brought everything full circle, and not in the way he expected. The next day, the tension in the office grew. The CEO came in late, surrounded by board members. His usual confidence was gone. His assistant walked behind him nervously, avoiding eye contact with everyone. People whispered as he passed. Daniel stayed far from the commotion. He didn't want to be near that man again. He focused on cleaning the lobby, his headphones in, music playing softly. But he could still sense the unease in the air. By lunchtime, the news channels had started airing the story. Headlines read, "CEO caught on camera insulting employee." Reporters stood outside the building hoping for a statement. The board members had no choice but to respond. They released a short message saying they were reviewing the incident. Inside, everyone was talking about it. Some employees said they had always known the CEO was harsh. Others said they were finally glad someone had seen his true side. But most people agreed on one thing. Daniel didn't deserve what had happened. Meanwhile, the intern who had recorded the video sat quietly at her desk. She hadn't told anyone it was her. She didn't post it for fame or attention. She just couldn't stay silent after witnessing that kind of disrespect. She had watched how Daniel handled himself with calm and dignity, even when he was being insulted. That had stayed with her. As the day went on, Daniel noticed people treating him differently. They spoke to him with more respect. Some even apologized for not stepping in that day. He appreciated it, but he didn't need pity. What he wanted was simple: to be seen as a person, not just a janitor. Later that week, a small group of employees gathered around him during a break. One of them said, "You handled that better than anyone else could have. You didn't yell or fight back." "That took strength." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sometimes silence is the only thing you have left," he said. When he returned home that evening, he found a letter slipped under his door. It was from one of his old employees from his cleaning company. The note said, "I saw you on the news. You haven't changed. You're still the same man who taught us to work with pride no matter what job we do. Thank you for that." He folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. For the first time in a long while, he felt something warm in his chest. A quiet sense of peace. Maybe life had taken everything from him, but it hadn't taken his dignity. By the end of the week, things inside the company were spinning out of control. The board had called for a meeting to discuss the CEO's future. Employees whispered about potential replacements, and outside protesters were gathering, holding signs calling for justice. Daniel didn't join any of it. He stayed focused, sweeping and cleaning like always. He knew the world was watching now, but he wasn't doing any of this for attention. He just wanted to do his job right and live honestly. Still, deep inside, he couldn't help but wonder, maybe this moment had a purpose. Maybe all the hardship he went through was leading him somewhere he never expected. As he looked out at the city lights from the top floor that night, he whispered to himself, "Everything happens for a reason." He didn't know it yet, but that reason was already on its way. A single phone call, waiting just a few days ahead, would soon change everything, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever underestimated the power of quiet strength. The morning light came slowly over the city, spilling through the tall glass windows of the corporate building. Inside, there was a strange tension that made the air feel heavier than usual. Daniel arrived early, as always, carrying his mop and bucket, stepping quietly into the lobby. The hum of the air conditioner and the faint squeak of his shoes on the polished floor were the only sounds as he began his work. But this morning was different. Daniel could feel it in the looks people gave him. Employees passed by more quickly than usual, whispering to each other, glancing toward him and then away. He wasn't sure if it was about him or the CEO, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, Daniel sensed that something had shifted. Overnight, the video had spread everywhere. Social media platforms were filled with posts, hashtags, and comments. People everywhere were talking about the CEO's cruel words, and Daniel's calm response had become the focus. He wasn't yelling or screaming. He hadn't struck back. He had simply stayed calm, quietly standing his ground while being humiliated in front of everyone. And that image, that quiet strength, had touched people. By mid-morning, the company's phones were ringing non-stop. Reporters called asking for statements. News outlets wanted interviews. The CEO's office was a flurry of activity, assistants rushing in and out, doors opening and closing. The board had called emergency meetings. Even some of the CEO's close advisors were whispering about the possibility of replacing him. Daniel stayed in the background, moving his mop carefully, sweeping corners, and making sure the floors were spotless. He didn't want attention. He had learned long ago that attention could be dangerous, that it could bring trouble and chaos. Still, he couldn't help noticing the shift. People were treating him differently. Some smiled politely. Others whispered words of encouragement as they passed. He felt a mix of embarrassment and quiet pride. Meanwhile, the intern who had recorded the video watched everything unfold from her small desk. She had done it on a whim, not expecting the chain reaction it would cause. She felt nervous thinking about the potential consequences if anyone discovered she had been the one who captured it. But she also felt a deep sense of relief and satisfaction. She had seen injustice and she had acted. That small action had grown into something much bigger than she ever imagined. By noon, the story had made national news. Headlines screamed about workplace abuse and racism, showing clips from the viral video. Commentators discussed the CEO's behavior, the culture of the company, and the courage of the janitor who had endured it all silently. People across the country were talking about Daniel without even knowing his name. Social media had made the situation impossible for the company to ignore. Posts went viral with millions of views. People expressed anger, disbelief, and support. Many shared their own stories of being treated unfairly at work. Some demanded the CEO be fired immediately. Others wrote messages of support for Daniel, praising him for handling the situation with dignity. Inside the building, the atmosphere was electric. Employees whispered about what was happening online. Some were scared of the attention, wondering if their jobs would be affected. Others felt a sense of justice being served. Even those who had never noticed Daniel before were beginning to recognize him. He was no longer invisible. Daniel kept working quietly. He didn't know that the attention was growing outside the building. He didn't know that news crews were filming from across the street, or that reporters were waiting to interview him if he agreed. He only knew that he had to finish his shift, keep the floors clean, and try to maintain a sense of normalcy in a world that was suddenly anything but normal. Later that afternoon, a meeting was called by the board. The CEO sat in a glass conference room, his face pale and tight with frustration. He slammed his hands on the table and spoke loudly, trying to control the situation. "This video is taken out of context," he shouted. "People don't understand what really happened." His advisors and board members looked uncomfortable. The evidence was clear and the public reaction was overwhelming. They had no choice but to consider serious consequences. A few suggested an apology, but others argued that words alone would not repair the damage. The reputation of the company was at stake. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to clean. He moved through the hallways, focused on his work, tuning out the chaos. Yet he couldn't ignore the small gestures, the nods of respect from employees, the whispered thank you as someone walked past. For the first time in years, he felt seen. By late afternoon, the pressure on the CEO was intense. Social media continued to grow, and news outlets demanded statements. Former employees of the company began sharing their experiences online, adding weight to the narrative. It was clear that the CEO's reputation and career were at risk. Daniel still remained quiet. He hadn't asked for any of this attention. He didn't want it. He had only wanted to do his job and live his life honestly. But now the world had seen him. People recognized his calm dignity, his resilience, and his ability to endure humiliation without losing his humanity. As evening approached, Daniel's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. "Hello?" he said. "Daniel?" A calm voice asked. "I'm calling because of the video. My name is Mr. Thompson. I'm a businessman and I saw what happened. I want to meet you. Are you available?" Daniel paused. He wasn't used to people reaching out like this. I suppose so," he said carefully. "Good," the voice said. "I think we have something important to discuss." "I'll send you the details." Daniel hung up, his heart racing. He didn't know what to expect. For years he had worked quietly, unnoticed, surviving on the small dignity of his own efforts. Now the world was watching, and suddenly someone wanted to offer him an opportunity. That night, Daniel sat in his small apartment thinking about the day. He replayed the video in his mind, remembered the cruel words, and then remembered the calm way he had stood. It wasn't pride he felt. It was a quiet realization that dignity had value, even when no one else recognized it. Over the next few days, the story continued to grow. News outlets covered the CEO's downfall. Employees talked openly about their experiences, and online support for Daniel became a wave of encouragement and admiration. People shared the video repeatedly, praising Daniel's patience and strength. It wasn't long before hashtags started trending, celebrating his dignity and perseverance. Inside the building, the board of directors finally made a decision. The CEO would be removed from his position due to public pressure, ethical violations, and repeated incidents of abusive behavior. It was a major change that no one had anticipated, but it was a turning point. Employees were both relieved and nervous. They had seen a small piece of what Daniel endured daily. Many had ignored the signs before, but now the truth was visible for everyone to see. Daniel had always been quiet and unassuming, but now he had become a symbol, not because he wanted to, but because he had lived with honesty and courage. As the CEO left the building for the last time, security escorted him through the lobby. Daniel was in the corner, quietly finishing his work. He didn't look up. He didn't celebrate. He simply continued, his hands steady, his focus unwavering. But inside there was a small sense of relief, not for revenge, but for justice. Later that evening, Daniel received another call. It was from Mr. Thompson, the businessman who had reached out days earlier. He wanted to meet and discuss a potential opportunity, a chance to help Daniel rebuild, to turn his experiences into something positive. Daniel agreed to meet the next day, unsure what the outcome would be but quietly hopeful. That night he reflected on everything that had happened. The humiliation, the fear, the silence he had endured for so long, all of it had led to this moment. It was strange to think that a single video, a small act by an intern, could change so much. But that was the power of truth. Daniel went to bed that night with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew that something had shifted. The world had seen him, and in that seeing, there was a new possibility, a chance for dignity, respect, and maybe even a fresh start. In the quiet of his apartment, he whispered to himself, "I didn't ask for this, but maybe this is exactly what I needed." And somewhere in the city, outside the building that had once been a place of humiliation, the world was changing. People were talking, watching, and waiting to see what would happen next. For Daniel, the story was far from over. This was only the beginning. The morning sun had just begun to filter through the tall windows of a downtown cafe. Inside, it smelled faintly of coffee and pastries, a quiet warmth contrasting with the tension in the city outside. Daniel arrived a little early, holding a small bag with his belongings. He felt nervous, though he didn't want to admit it. Meetings were not new to him, but this was different. This was not about reporting for work or cleaning a hallway. This was about opportunity, something he hadn't seen in a long time. He scanned the cafe, and his eyes fell on a man sitting at a corner table, dressed simply but confidently with papers and a tablet laid out in front of him. This was Mr. Thompson, the businessman who had called him days earlier. Daniel approached cautiously, unsure how to greet him. "Good morning," Daniel said softly, offering a polite nod. "Good morning," Mr. Thompson replied, smiling warmly. "Thank you for coming. Please sit down." Daniel took a seat across from him, still holding his bag. He noticed the calm, approachable way Mr. Thompson spoke. He didn't carry the arrogance Daniel had seen in so many people in high positions. There was respect in his tone, a genuine interest in listening. "I've seen the video," Mr. Thompson began, leaning slightly forward, "and I want to hear your story. Not just what happened in that moment, but your life, your struggles, and what brought you here." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his life. He had spent years keeping it private, never seeking sympathy or attention. But something about Mr. Thompson's tone felt safe, honest. He took a deep breath and began. "I used to run my own cleaning company," Daniel said quietly. "It was small, but I built it from nothing. I hired people who needed work, people who wanted to do an honest job. We had a good reputation. Then one day a major contract with this building came through. It seemed like a chance to grow. I worked day and night to meet the standards. But suddenly the contract was canceled. No explanation, just gone. My business couldn't survive without it. I lost my company, my employees lost their jobs, and I lost everything." Mr. Thompson listened without interrupting, nodding thoughtfully. "That's a lot to endure," he said gently. "And then despite everything, you came here and worked quietly without complaint. You showed patience and dignity even in a place that didn't recognize your worth. That's rare." Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. "I never asked for attention, I just wanted to work honestly and survive. That's all I could do." "I understand," Mr. Thompson said, "and that's exactly why I want to help you. I've built businesses, and I've seen people with talent and integrity get overlooked because of circumstances, prejudice, or bad luck. I believe in second chances, real opportunities where people can start fresh. And I think you deserve that chance." Daniel felt a mix of hope and disbelief. He had been living in survival mode for so long that the idea of opportunity almost felt unreal. I don't know what to say," he murmured. "You don't need to say anything yet," Mr. Thompson replied. "I just want to explore possibilities. You know cleaning, operations, and leadership. You've already shown patience and resilience. With the right support, you could rebuild, bigger, better, and on your terms." Daniel's mind raced. For years he had dreamed of running his own business again, but fear and doubt had held him back. And now this man was offering not just hope but resources, guidance, and trust. He could feel a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in a long time. "Let's start small," Mr. Thompson continued. "I can help you with equipment, initial funding, and a team to get started. You bring your experience, your vision, and your leadership. Together, we'll build a company that's respected, sustainable, and fair." Daniel nodded slowly. The words felt heavy and real, like a bridge being built in front of him. I'd like that," he said quietly. "I want to try again. I want to do it right this time." Over the next hour, they discussed ideas, logistics, and plans. Mr. Thompson shared insights from his own experiences, talking about hiring, client relationships, and business ethics. Daniel spoke about his past company, what went wrong, and what he had learned. Every detail mattered, and every word built a sense of trust. By the end of the meeting, Daniel felt a new kind of energy. He wasn't just dreaming anymore, he was planning. He was thinking about employees he could hire, contracts he could pursue, and a company culture that would be built on respect and fairness. The humiliation from the CEO, the struggles, the losses, all of it now felt like preparation for this moment. When he left the cafe, Daniel felt lighter. The city streets were busy with traffic, but he didn't notice the noise. He walked with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a future, one he could shape with his own hands. The following days were a whirlwind. Mr. Thompson helped Daniel set up a small office, purchase supplies, and hire a few trusted workers. Daniel met with former colleagues who were eager to return to work, and he began to build a team. Every detail mattered, from uniforms to client forms, because Daniel wanted to do it right this time. Meanwhile, the story of the viral video continued to grow. News outlets covered the CEO's removal and Daniel's calm dignity. Social media followers celebrated his journey, praising him for staying strong. People who had never met him felt inspired. The story became a symbol of resilience and integrity. Daniel didn't seek the attention, but he also didn't avoid it. He began to understand that sometimes being visible was part of creating change. His focus remained on building a company that could make a difference, not just for himself, but for others who had been overlooked or undervalued. One morning, a representative from the old company, the same building where he had once worked as a janitor, contacted him. They wanted to offer a cleaning contract for several floors in the building. Daniel thought about it carefully. This could be an opportunity for revenge, but he didn't want that. He wanted professionalism, respect, and dignity. He accepted the contract, not to hurt anyone, but to show what could be achieved with fairness and hard work. When he arrived at the building with his new team, the receptionists and employees looked surprised. Daniel, once a janitor they barely noticed, now walked confidently, accompanied by a group of motivated workers. He signed the contract calmly, shaking hands with the building manager. There was no gloating, no prideful show, just professionalism and quiet strength. The staff watched, some smiling, some impressed. For Daniel, this was more than just business. It was proof that respect, dignity, and perseverance could open doors that were once closed. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's company began to grow steadily. Clients praised the efficiency, professionalism, and attention to detail of his team. Word spread quickly, and more contracts started coming in. Daniel made sure every employee was treated fairly, paid well, and recognized for their hard work. He wanted to create the kind of workplace he had once dreamed of, one where people felt valued and respected. The intern who had recorded the video was invited to join Daniel's team in communications. She had been a quiet hero, the person whose small action had started everything. Daniel welcomed her, not as a favor, but as recognition for her courage and integrity. Together, they began managing public relations, handling media requests, and sharing the story in a way that inspired others. One evening, Daniel stood by the window of his new office looking out at the city lights. He thought about the past, the humiliation, the losses, and the struggles. And he thought about the present, the opportunities, the team, and the future. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of balance. The pain had not been erased, but it had led him to a place of hope and purpose. He whispered softly to himself, "Everything I went through, it wasn't for nothing." And in that quiet moment, Daniel realized that the world had changed around him, not because he had sought revenge or recognition, but because he had remained true to himself. He had acted with dignity even when no one was watching. And now, doors that had once seemed closed were wide open. The story of the janitor who endured humiliation had turned into the story of a man who rebuilt his life, inspired others, and created opportunities where none existed before. The viral video was no longer just a moment of shame. It had become the spark for change, a reminder that integrity and resilience could overcome injustice. Daniel knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew he was ready. For the first time, he was not just surviving. He was building, leading, and making a difference. And as he looked out at the city, he felt a quiet pride, not in what others thought of him, but in the fact that he had remained himself, no matter what. The city had changed, but Daniel had changed even more. Months had passed since the video went viral, and life had taken a turn he never expected. What had begun as humiliation had grown into opportunity, and that opportunity had turned into success. Daniel's company, small at first, was now expanding steadily. Clients trusted him, employees respected him, and the community looked up to him as a symbol of perseverance and dignity. Every morning, Daniel walked into the office with a sense of purpose. The office was no longer just a room with desks and computers. It was alive with energy, filled with people who cared about their work and the company they were building together. Employees chatted, laughed, and supported each other. The culture was one of respect, fairness, and teamwork, the opposite of the environment he had endured as a janitor. Daniel still remembered the mornings he had spent cleaning hallways, quietly enduring insults. The memory of the CEO's harsh words sometimes lingered, but now it only reminded him of how far he had come. He understood something important. Humiliation could break a person if they let it, but it could also teach resilience, patience, and strength. One afternoon, Daniel received a call from the building where he had once worked as a janitor. It was the manager. "Daniel," the manager said nervously, "we'd like to expand our contract with your company. We've been impressed with your team's work." Daniel smiled, but not in a way that felt like revenge. It was a quiet, confident smile. "Of course," he said. "We'd be happy to help. Let's make sure everything is done right." He didn't take pleasure in the irony. He wasn't going to gloat about the past. What mattered to him was the present, the chance to do something meaningful, to build a company that respected people and treated them fairly. The past had taught him humility and patience. The present gave him purpose. That evening, he walked through the building with his team, showing them the floors they would be cleaning under the new contract. Employees who had once looked down on him now watched as he led the team with confidence and professionalism. He gave clear instructions, offered encouragement, and treated everyone with respect. It was a full-circle moment. Daniel had once mopped these very floors under humiliation and scorn, and now he walked as a business owner, respected and admired. But he didn't dwell on the past. He focused on the work, on his team, and on building a company that would stand the test of time. In the following months, Daniel's company continued to grow. New contracts came in from other businesses that had heard about his professionalism and the viral story that had inspired so many. He hired more employees, many of whom had struggled to find work or had been overlooked elsewhere. Daniel made sure they were trained, respected, and appreciated. He wanted everyone to experience the dignity that he had fought to hold on to during his years of hardship. The intern who had recorded the video became an important part of the team. She handled communications and social media, helping share the company's story in ways that inspired people. She had been the quiet hero who started it all, and Daniel recognized her courage. Together, they told stories of resilience, ethics, and fairness, hoping to encourage others who faced unfair treatment in their own workplaces. Daniel also spent time mentoring new employees personally. He shared his story not to boast, but to teach them the importance of patience, integrity, and resilience. "You can't control what others do," he told them, "but you can control how you respond. Your dignity is in your hands, and no one can take it unless you give it away." One afternoon, Daniel received a letter in the mail. It was from one of his former employees from the old company he had run years ago. The note read, "Daniel, I saw your story. I always knew you were special. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to rise again, to do it with dignity and grace. I hope to work with you someday."